Great, so welcome everyone to this series of sessions with multiple different speakers that aim to share an assortment of skills in interdisciplinary methods and methodologies. I'm Sydney Burns, and this session has been organized by the University of Stirling Interdisciplinary Research Network, also the IRN, which is run by a small group of PhD students via online Teams currently, hoping to get back to in-person soon. Our network has around 100 members comprising of researchers from different disciplines and universities across Scotland and the UK. The aim of our network is to share knowledge across disciplines, support each other, to explore new and exciting ideas and methods related to interdisciplinary working. And information on how to join the network is available on our website. The network is open to PhD students and early career researchers everywhere, and it's fully free to join and participate. So parts of this week-long series of events has been supported by the Stirling Fund, and we'd like to thank donors of the fund for helping to enhance the student experience through events like this one. So this afternoon we have 3 methods skills share sessions, and the first one is this one, which is on the Shape ID toolkit for integrating across disciplines with Professor Catherine Lyall from the School of Social and Political Science at the University of Edinburgh. We will then have a 15-minute break, followed by the remaining 2 sessions in parallel, which most of you would have selected between when registering for the event, but we'll go over that after the break in case you didn't select one. So for this session, the first part, well, for all sessions actually, the first part will be a presentation and will be recorded and shared. Normally we would stop the recording after the presentation and before the discussion, but Catherine has asked today if it would be okay if we record the whole session, just in case there's some useful discussions that they could take back and integrate into the toolkit later. So if for this first session, we will leave the recording on for the entire hour, but if you are not comfortable with that, please send me a private message and we'll work something out. But if you do keep your video off, you won't be seen in the recording. If you'd like to ask a question, but not associated with your name, then just send me again the question and I will pose it to Catherine for you. So anonymously. And so the first, sorry, I've said that already. So yeah, without further ado, I'll hand it over to Professor Catherine Lyall to begin her session, and that's it. So thank you. Thanks.
You're struggling from all these early morning starts, aren't you, Sydney? It's been a long week.
Yes.
It's lovely to be with everyone. I'm sorry I'm not seeing more faces on camera. But as Sydney said, if you're not comfortable speaking, then if you want to ask questions, just do post them in the chat or do it via Sydney. The only reason I asked if we might record a bit more of this session is that I was hoping to make it a little bit more interactive. I was very conscious that it's Friday afternoon and that you've had quite a busy week, and the last thing you need is a very long Zoom presentation from me. And I would also just like to hear a bit more about your experiences and how this week's gone and what you've learned from it. Now, although we've called this part of the method share session, I'm not really teaching or talking about a method as such. I'll explain a bit more about that in a minute. But it's also just an opportunity to showcase the work that we've been doing with the Shape ID project. So I do have 1 or 2 slides. I'm going to share my screen, but I am also hoping that we'll have a bit of a chat as well. So anyway, let me just tell you a little bit about the Shape ID project. This is a European funded project that I've been working on over the last 2.5 years with a number of colleagues from Switzerland, Ireland, the Netherlands, Poland. And we're coming to the end of this grant now, and one of the main outputs has been a web-based toolkit. So I'm going to show you some of the resources there, and I'd really like to get your feedback on what you think about the toolkit. It's going to be launched on the 10th of June. If you're interested in coming along to that, I can give you a link where you can register, and it would be super to see more people there. As I said, I'd like to make this a little bit more of a discussion if we can. But let me just give you a little bit of a preview, and you're welcome to type that web address into your computers and just have a wee play around while I'm talking. That will be grand. So the idea behind the Shape ID grant is that, I mean, as you guys all know, a lot of the problems that we face as a society globally is that there are many issues that require research, but that research has to come from more than one perspective. And obviously, a lot of our funders, including the European Union, will fund a lot of research projects with this interdisciplinary or even transdisciplinary perspective in mind. But the European Commission is very conscious that there's not a great deal of participation from disciplines from the arts, humanities and social sciences within these interdisciplinary programmes. So the Shape ID project was set up as a way of encouraging more participation from AHSS disciplines, and also to help them understand what was involved, what the benefits were, what some of the challenges were. So we've had a series of activities, as you might imagine, with a research project starting with extensive literature reviews. We ran a series of learning case workshops, and we've been synthesising the material that we've gathered in that way and producing this toolkit. So as you look at the toolkit, you'll see that it has a number of goals, as I said, in terms of explaining what inter and transdisciplinary research are, thinking about how you create the collaborative conditions, because often this type of research is done as a collaboration. I'd be interested to hear from some of you as to whether you're actually working in research teams as part of your PhD or whether you're working them on your own. But looking at some of the practical tips of how to engage and communicate with collaborators, and then also advice to funders in terms of how they should be funding and supporting and evaluating this type of research. So the toolkit comes in a number of parts. There are some case studies, there are various downloadable guides, top 10 tips, discussion tools. At the heart of it is a series of guided pathways, and I'll show you a little bit more of these in a moment. So we're hoping that there's something there for various different audiences, recognising that we're trying to meet the needs of various different toolkit users. So that's just a quick flavour of what we're going to be looking at this afternoon. But I wanted to just start off. I'd really like to hear a bit from you about how the week's gone and what you've learned from this week. I know you've been dropping in and out of different sessions. You may not have listened to everybody's talk this week, but I wondered if there was anything that had maybe particularly surprised you, something that you'd learned that you hadn't thought about before. Or equally, there might be things that are unresolved in your mind. Are there issues that you had hoped would be clarified for you this week that are still unresolved? So if anybody wants to put a camera on, I'd love to see you and you can talk to me, or if you prefer to put it in the chat, that would be fine too. But maybe just take a minute to think back over the various talks and activities you've been doing this week. And tell me what you learned, what was new. If you're happier, I can ask Sydney to put the recording off just now, if that would encourage you to put your cameras on, that would be fine. Which is, thanks, Sydney. So this has become, I think, my favourite quote about interdisciplinarity. It's from Felicity Callard and Des Fitzgerald's book. If you don't know it, it's called Rethinking Interdisciplinarity. It's a short Palgrave pivot, and they are reflecting on their experiences of working in neuropsychology, but in a very interdisciplinary way. So it's a good read, and I just love this quote. When I'm teaching, I very much want to get across the message that interdisciplinarity isn't one thing. There is no one definition of interdisciplinarity. I tend to use the National Academy's definition here that I've put on screen, because I think it helpfully illustrates the fact that this is research that can either be done on your own as an individual, or it's something that might be done in a collaboration. Now, for most people, certainly people who are working in the arts, humanities and social sciences, a PhD tends to be a kind of solitary activity. Whereas if you come from the natural sciences or the medical sciences, then you are perhaps more likely to be working in a team. And there's a very good blog, if you know the I2S blog, Andy Hess did a nice piece there a wee while ago about the very different types of research that you do, depending on whether you're working in a team or by yourself. So that's the first thing I wanted to pick out of that quote. The next thing is that kind of what the umbrella sort of unifying theme, if there is one, about interdisciplinary research is that we're looking for some form of integration, whether that's integrating data or methods or theories or different practitioner perspectives, but there is that element of integration. And then the final thing is that we do interdisciplinary research for different reasons. It might be, as I said at the beginning, because we're challenged by various societal or global issues, or it may be that we're doing something that is actually more endogenous, that it's actually more internal to the discipline, and that you're trying to help a discipline evolve in some way. So very different types of research, depending on what it is you're actually seeking to do with an interdisciplinary approach. And I think a lot of this really hinges on this word integrate, and it's one that I think we all struggle with. It's really been at the core of the Shape ID project. Now, there are various techniques for what might this integration look like. It can be about combining different research techniques or methods. This is often something that happens, I think, in the natural sciences. I think that the STEM disciplines are often more adaptable and flexible in terms of taking a technique or a tool that's been developed in one field or one discipline and applying it to another area. It could be at a much more theoretical level, that you're taking a theory that's been developed in one discipline and you're then trying to elaborate that within a different disciplinary context. I guess the most sort of obvious or straightforward sort of approach to integration is when you're trying to combine quantitative and qualitative methods. Now, that in itself may not be interdisciplinary because they may be methods, they may both be sociological methods. So again, that isn't necessarily what I would call interdisciplinary. These days, we're often working with sort of large data sets, so it might be that your research is working across different types of data sets in the social and natural sciences. It could be that you're developing particular tools. Modeling is often a way of thinking about how you integrate data from different areas. So again, this is getting to the sense that there is no one single recipe for how to do this integration. If I was thinking, I was looking at the lecture that I do for our research design class in our graduate school. And we do one lecture on interdisciplinary. We try and encompass the whole of interdisciplinary research into one lecture. But it's things about actually being aware. Well, first of all, that interdisciplinarity is not just one thing, but it needs to be designed into your research from the outset. So this, as I said, is a course about interdisciplinary research design. One of the things, and I think maybe Zoe hinted at this in her comment, one of the things that sometimes students will just assume that interdisciplinarity is just, well, kind of everything. I wanted a kind of mismatch of lots of different things that interest me. Now, I would argue that isn't good integrative interdisciplinary research. And I think that I've got a few tips. Let me just see. I had some other questions. Yeah. I think that's particularly key when you're doing a PhD, because you have a limited amount of time and resource. So you have to be quite specific about where you're placing the boundaries. Because if you try and do absolutely everything, you will end up with a very shallow study that isn't necessarily going to get the PhD and isn't necessarily going to, attract that mythical kind of contribution that a PhD is supposed to do. So, as I've said there, selectivity, it's key to any good research design process, but it's especially important when you're thinking about doing an interdisciplinary research design. And I always say to the students, you know, that there is no one perfect research design. What you're doing is you are justifying the choices that you are making. So that you're justifying the research questions, the research methods that you're going to use, how you operationalize those questions. And the problem, of course, if you're taking an interdisciplinary approach, is the choice is just that much wider. So you really do have to be quite selective if you're going to maintain your sanity throughout the PhD process. And I think, above all, just, you know, really, does this research actually demand an interdisciplinary approach? Or are you doing it because it sounds a bit sexy and lots of people are doing interdisciplinary research? But, you know, do you really need to take an interdisciplinary approach in order to answer your research question? Given that it is that much more challenging, that it takes longer, that you're going to read across many more different sets of literature than somebody doing a much more focused, discipline-based piece of research. The other thing that you really do need to consider is how you demonstrate quality and credibility if you're doing something that crosses different disciplinary traditions and norms. I mean, if you just think about the difference between the typical natural science PhD thesis and one that comes from the humanities, say, where a humanities scholar will essentially write a book, they will write a monograph, there will be a story, a beginning, a middle and an end to their thesis. Whereas often if you're doing something in the sciences, natural sciences, your thesis may actually just include a series of bound published journal articles. Now, what happens if you're trying to do something that spans both of those traditions? How are you going to demonstrate that what you've done is credible? You're not going to be able to be an expert in 2 or more disciplines. Where your expertise lies is in the bringing together of the information, whether, as I said, it's a method or tools or theories. So you are always going to feel, and I think this goes back to the point that Wendy was making in the chat about not feeling quite as if you're belonging, you know, that you don't have the credibility. So how are you going to demonstrate that you have expertise in this particular area of interdisciplinary knowledge? And you will need to be quite robust in terms of justifying your approach, you know, in terms of explaining why what you're doing is interesting and relevant, because it may not be self-evident to your supervisors or your examiners, and you need to be quite careful in your choice of both, I think, in order that you can be fairly assessed on the quality of your work. So, having said that I'm not offering any sort of kind of let's say I'm not offering a recipe for interdisciplinarity. Maybe what we're offering is a cookbook where you have to sort of pick your own recipes. So what I'm going to do now, let me just check the time. What I'm going to do now is suggest that you take a few minutes, you know, we might take 5 or 10 minutes, we've got plenty of time in this session, to actually explore this toolkit that I've given you the link to. And I would like you to do that with 2 questions in mind. If you are new to interdisciplinary research, what would you need to get you started? Now, some of you I know are quite well advanced in your PhD program. So what would you advise your former self when you were setting out right at the beginning? What did you really need to help you get started? And are you able to find any information in the toolkit that I've given you that might help you with that question or that information that you were looking for? While you're doing that, I'm very happy to continue the chat if people want to ask me specific questions. If you want to turn the recording off now, Sydney, I mean, I think the rest of the talk is just going to be a discussion, so people might feel more comfortable putting their cameras on if we're not recording.